Welcome to Strength for Today's Pastor, conversations with current senior pastors and leaders which will strengthen and help you in your pastoral ministry. And now, here's your host, Bill Holdridge of Poiman Ministries.
Welcome to podcast number 123 of Strength for Today's Pastor. Today, we're with Doug Eagle of Eagle Retirement Plans, Inc. And just in preparing for this podcast, I was reminded of John Wesley's famous quote in a sermon he delivered entitled The Use of Money. And in that sermon, he gave this famous line that believers should earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. So it's really good to have Doug Eagle with us today to talk about these things, especially geared towards senior pastors. So Doug's going to be bringing hope and encouragement to pastors in the light of a possible retirement from the senior pastorate, hope and encouragement for those who opted out of Social Security years ago and want to know how to move forward with what seems to be a limited income, and hope and encouragement for those who just want to be better stewards of what God has allowed them to have. So that's where we're going in this podcast interview. Doug, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Well, we've been talking about it for a while, so we finally getting down to it.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, happy to have it happen. So the Eagle Retirement Plan website has the mission statement specializing in holistic wealth management. But wealth isn't really a word that a lot of pastors connect with in relationship, to themselves. But you've seen a lot, you've heard a lot over the years concerning pastors and the plight of pastors and what they've needed. And you've gotten involved with pastors as a result. And you haven't gotten involved for the purpose of making a profit for yourself. You've got a book of clients that handles all that. You've gotten involved because you have a heart for pastors. And so maybe you could just talk, Doug, a little bit about how and why did you develop a heart and calling to help pastors using what God has given you in your financial background and expertise.
You're right, Bill. The Lord has blessed us with a nice size of book of business that just provides for my family and those that I'm working with, those employees with us. But I started working with pastors back in around 2004, 2005. So you're talking 17, almost 18 years now. But it really didn't come to a head until about 2008 when my uncle, who was a pastor in Ohio, unexpectedly passed away from a massive heart attack. And I saw what happened and how that left my aunt. And fortunately, the Lord is always good. My cousin was there and was able to come alongside and, help her out and things worked out. But I did look and see that there were just some things that, pastors were missing and that he just wasn't shared with him because he was just a non-denominational pastor, not part of these big denominations where they have all these different types of benefits and plans and things like that for them. So for about a year, I wrestled with the Lord. I jokingly say, Jacob got away with wrestling with the Lord overnight. I kind of wrestled with him for about a year, looking at, what I'm doing. I did have a heart to be a pastor right out of high school and into college. But the Lord took me on an eclectic journey through many different avenues. And eventually he has me here doing, investments, retirement planning, estate planning, things like that. And so I wrestled with him, just like, Lord, why am I here? What am I going to do? My desire was to serve you. And it wasn't until 2009, literally 12 months later, that the Lord provided an opportunity where a pastor friend of mine, who was an administrative pastor, asked if I was aware of and could I build what's called a 403b9 retirement plan. But he didn't want it built just for his church. He wanted it built where all Calvary chapels could participate, because the larger the number of participants, the lower the cost could be. So that started me on another year-long journey of building out this multiple employer type retirement plan that all Calvary chapels could participate in, from the smallest church, one pastor, one secretary, to, we just had a recent church join us that's, 160, 180 employees, where they can all participate, join this plan, and then they get the best pricing. And that really launched us into really working diligently and serving the pastors in this arena.
That's great. That's a tremendous thing. And we'll talk more about the 403b9 plan a little bit later. But just to give pastors that are listening to this, Doug, a frame of reference, and a lot of people can relate to this. So a lot of people can understand what I'm going to ask because of their connection with Dave Ramsey. So would it be fair to say that you're in agreement with the principles of Dave Ramsey's organization? Maybe you could just talk about that a little bit and the connection there, because a lot of guys are going to be able to relate to that. They like his style.
Absolutely. We are what is referred to as a smart vestor, part of his smart vestor program. So when somebody goes through his website and plugs in their zip code, they get a list of smart vestor advisors that adhere to basically the Dave Ramsey philosophy of the baby steps. So we were actually doing Ramsey style investment saving, staying out of debt before we were involved with Dave Ramsey's organization. When I read his book, he did a recent book that came out with a recent study talking about everyday millionaires. And he has shown that over 51% of the people who they interviewed had incomes less than $75,000. 16% earned less than $50,000, and 21% earned in excess over $100,000 per year. So it just shows that by staying out of debt, controlling your finances, even with a small amount of money, you can become an everyday millionaire. You can set up your retirement. And so that philosophy we have used for years, and we will continue to use it because it does work. And there's hundreds of thousands of people that can attest to that.
That's great. So obviously Jesus values stewardship, and he talked in the parable of the unjust steward in Luke chapter 16 about the use of unrighteous mammon. And then he said, he who is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in that which is much. He's talking about the use of money. He's talking about stewardship. So I've always loved that because to me, it seems like stewardship for a Christian and financial faithfulness is like Christianity 101 in terms of discipleship. I mean, if we don't get this, then it's going to be tough to be really effective in other areas as well. So I appreciate about your ministry that that's what your focus is. But sometimes, and I've been there, pastors succumb to poor financial practices on a personal level. So what basic advice do you have for pastors? Going back to John Wesley's quote, earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. What advice do you basically, generally speaking, give to pastors in that situation?
Well, there's a lot there, Bill. And I can talk on that for hours. But, where pastors could start is I always want to start where, Jesus says, count the cost, right? In Luke 14, he talks about we got to count the cost. So, pastors, their famous saying is, I'll retire in the pulpit. Usually, casket lid closes and they're retired. That's usually when that happens. I tell them kind of jokingly, but seriously, I said, look, that's a single wide casket. Unless you and your wife meet up with a Mack truck, it's going to be a single wide casket, not a double wide. So how do you plan? How do you count the cost and plan for your wife's when you go home to be with the Lord, right? So we go to 1 Timothy 5:8, and it talks about, those that don't care for their family are worse than unbelievers. So let's start there. Let's take Luke and let's count the cost. What does that look like? So let's prepare now for your family. And you're probably doing that. You're earning a living, and that's going well. But let's also look at Proverbs 30:24, right? It talks about the ants and how little they are and how much they save. And you can do just a little savings, get started. and then plan, right? And then you're able to add on to that over time. And again, you go back to Ramsey and his research and survey. They don't need to be making a lot of money. Working with pastors for over 17, almost 18 years now, I can tell you a lot of them are making a whole lot less than $100,000 a year. And most of those people that were in that survey don't get a tax-free housing allowance while they're trying to save. So I think there are a lot of benefits that pastors have. Yes, they may not be making over 100,000, but what they do make, they can save, they can earn. So I would say, let's just start with those two. Let's count the cost and let's plan and start a savings program, and then we can expand. My pastor has a famous saying that I love to reiterate, and that is, you cannot steer a parked car. So you got to get the car moving. You got to get headed down that road, and then you can make the adjustments as you go. But let's at least get started.
Yeah. So the guy that's thinking, I don't make enough money, and whatever I could do to start something is so little it wouldn't make any difference. You're saying that's not true. Get started now.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then what happens over time, and sometimes, a lot of times when the pastors get raises, just split it in half, right? There's quick advice. Take half of that raise, give it to your retirement account, and give the other half to yourself. So you still receive the benefit of it, but your retirement now gets a little pay raise. And it's just that way over time. I mean, our office started in 1981. My partner was a teacher and started with 403Bs. And I can go through this book of business that we have, and I can find millionaire teachers that never made more than $50,000, $60,000, which again coincides with what Dave's Ramsey research has shown, is that it doesn't take $100,000, $200,000 annual salary to be able to become a millionaire in retirement. Just save, just like the ants, right? Save a little and keep growing it over time.
Well, that, the big money earners, there's that proverb that says when riches increase, they increase who use them. So more money means more spending in most cases. and so it gets frittered away. Yeah. What happened to all that money?
Yeah, the world likes to say more money, more problems. Yeah. And so, let's just be a good steward of what you have. And let's find the right structure to be able to do that in. And that's what we're here to do, is to walk alongside, show you what's there and how to use it. And you'll see the benefits later. And it may not be for the pastor. The pastor might absolutely, like, Pastor Chuck, what happened, with him, preached on one weekend and, went home to be with the Lord a few days later. And you know what? That's great. But like I said earlier, the wife is going to be left behind. I watched that with my aunt. I saw what happened there. So I know that's going to happen. So how do we make sure that he is prepared properly for his homeward, for him to go home and for his wife to be left in a comfortable situation? Because we don't want her to be a burden on the church, right? And the church she doesn't want to be a burden to the church, right? They've spent all those years serving and ministering. She doesn't want to be a burden. So we need to make sure that the pastor has planned properly.
So starting from where we're at, and of course, as well as I do, that pastors are all over the map in terms of what their position is. They're older, they're younger, they're bivocational, they're supported fully by the ministry, they're paid a little bit, they're paid more than a little bit. I mean, it's all over the map, and it's a challenge. And I know that, and I want to take this opportunity to say thanks again, Doug, for your counsel to sharing me, because we called you before we made our move to Texas. We were planning on a certain strategy, and we laid out our situation, and you asked us some pointed questions, and then your counsel to us, basically, after you found out that we were not in debt at that time, and we're not in debt now either, you then strongly encouraged us to, if at all possible, pay cash for our house. We never even conceived that idea. We were thinking about a 15-year mortgage and all those kinds of things when we moved, and your advice was golden, and I really appreciated that. And because of that, we were able to buy a house that was affordable, and we were actually able to pay cash for our home, which is an amazing thing. So if I croak, then she can sell the house, and that'll help toward her future. So, is there any area, Doug, that pastors more typically than other areas, have needed help financially speaking? Maybe a couple areas you can think of. I know that's a big question too. I'm asking all these big questions that I know you could go on a long time with, but anything stand out in your mind?
Yeah, the first thing is, and this is where we developed a website after talking with you about widows and situations like that. We developed another website called Pastor's Legacy Plan. It's pastorslegacyplan.com. And in there, it allows a pastor to determine, if he were to pass away tomorrow, how much would his wife or family, if he still has kids in the house, how much they would need to be able to survive. And they can run that. It's a free quote, or a free calculator. And then they could actually get free quotes for term life insurance policies. So that's part of counting the cost. We need to determine what's gonna be done. And really, the term life insurance is really a vehicle that can create an estate where there is none. So that now buys you time, right? That buys you time to be able to start saving those little, maybe it's pennies, maybe it's a couple dollars here, maybe it's a few $100s, maybe it's $1,000 a month, whatever you can afford. Once you get that started, that life insurance gives you that time to build up to that net worth that you need for your spouse. And I'm not going to say for him, because I know most of these guys, I know their hearts, they want to just minister and serve. But, I've also worked with pastors that have become disabled, whether it's for 2 years or 3 years or permanently, right? And so that's also counted costs, right? Disability insurance, life insurance. And those things allow you time to build that nest egg that will care for maybe you and your wife in case you become disabled and you can't work anymore. Or when you go home to be with the Lord, that money's left over for your wife so she can then be cared for and is not a burden on the church. And then when you do that, it's, now we get into, do you have a proper retirement plan that's designed specifically for the church? And that's when we start discussing the 403b9 church plan. And that becomes overwhelming even for some of these administrative pastors. They're kind of blown away with all the intricacies of a retirement plan and what's in their best interest. And, I know every pastor has a guy, right? That has a guy that can give them a retirement plan, and that's fine. The problem is most advisors aren't aware of a 403b9 plan. Some that are aware of it, they just call their local custodian and say, hey, I need a 403b for a church. And they don't know whether it's the school district 403b or if it's an actual 403b9. But we actually have done the hard work and the dirty work and rolled up our sleeves and dug into the whole 403b9 arena and have designed a very robust plan that even for those late stage pastors, I can arrange for the church to help fund their retirement up to 5 years after they've left the pastorate. And I've just done that with a few pastors already. So there's quite a bit of information on that we can help pastors kind of work through. And that's just our desire, is just to shepherd God shepherds in the area of finances. And that's kind of a slogan that I've termed is just shepherding shepherds in the area of finance. That's what I've been called to do. And that's my heart's desire. And when we start working through this, we find a lot of places that they've not been serviced well by other advisors out there, just because the pastor role, the taxes, the retirement stuff, it's very unique to them. And we just want to do a great job of serving them in that area.
So I want to go back to the term insurance thing. I know a little bit about that because I have a term policy, but it's going to expire in a year and a half or so. And now I'm an old man and trying to get a term policy that will fund reasonably is really out of my financial capabilities. So there's that kind of a question or problem. But then you've set it up for me in a 403b9 where I can start throwing money, not throwing, but investing money into that program. So Talk about obviously the young guy who starts a term policy can get a lot of coverage for a little bit of money, but you get older and it doesn't become possible anymore. So maybe you can talk about the term idea, and then I'm going to piggyback on that with a question about the 403b9.
Sure. Yeah, the term policies, the insurance companies pretty much term everybody out as somewhere in the 72 to 73, 74 range. So because there's a life expectancy of everybody, and I mean, that's guaranteed. 1 out of 1 will pass away. So the insurance companies have kind of known that for decades now, right? So it's getting the younger guys and trying to plan that out is key. Getting the young guys on it. For some of the older guys, we have to look at different types of policies. Not big fan of the permanent ones. They still are more expensive even as they get older. So those usually aren't affordable either. So it's just making sure that that retirement plan is going to be funded as best can. In the churches, a lot of times with the senior pastors, a lot of times it's been founding pastors. So the board is willing to put more money to their account, which they can do legally. It's these 403bs are structured in a way you can do that pretty easily without being forced to contribute to other employees at that same time. But on the insurance, it is something that needs to be looked at, and every person's going to be uniquely different, because not only do we have to deal with the age, we have to deal with health, because as you get older, sometimes health it becomes the overriding cost factor in that. So when people say, "Oh, I'll think about it later," well, as what happened to one client, she was looking for a disability policy, and she said, "Well, I'll get back to you in a couple months. I got some things on my task list right now. I got to get done first." Well, unfortunately, she became disabled about a month later. And so she wasn't able to get a quote. And then when she was finally able to get a quote, a little over a year later, it was a lot more than what she originally was quoted. So anyway, so there's just that lost opportunity at that point. So we want to get it to you as soon as get it worked out with you as soon as possible.
Okay, so 403B versus 403B9. Most people are going to be a little bit more aware of the 403B. What's the difference between the two? And what have you put together that's unique?
So there's the basic 403Bs, which are for school districts, nonprofit organizations. The difference with the 403B9, and when it's, and in this case, I'm using it more analogous towards just discussing, or I'm trying to discuss more along the lines of the housing allowance, right? And it's setting up future housing allowance distributions from this retirement plan. Technically speaking, the 403B9 really has to do with the types of investments that go in it versus a 403B1, which is an annuity platform, or 403B7, which is a mutual fund platform. 403B9, technically speaking, means you can have any investments in it, including gold and all kinds of different real estate and all kinds of different things. So, but in the context of what we're discussing, I'm just trying to set it up as it's a church type account. And what we've designed into it is the housing allowance benefit, where all pre-tax contributions can go in, whether it's from the pastor, pre-tax contributions, or the employer, the church's contributions go in pre-tax. And then it's earmarked as future housing allowance in retirement. And that's the key. I've seen plan documents that just say a 403B non-ERISA religious plan. And that's great. That just means, it's a religious, it's not exempt. It's exempt from ERISA, which is the Employee Retirement Income Securities Act. That governs all 401ks. So they've outlined those. But what I have seen in those particular plans, when they say a non-ERISA religious plan document, is they don't have the housing allowance built into it. And a lot of times they don't even have the what I call the or what is called the post severance, post employment contribution, where I can have a church, and I'm doing this with a few churches right now, where the pastor's retired and they have 5 years worth of contributions going into his account, even though he's no longer working. And that's got to be structured too. So we have to make sure that that's set up in his last year, so that whatever contributions are going to go in are well within the IRS limits.
I love that you've got your eye on helping the pastor in his retirement years, because he's eventually, every pastor is going to retire from the church they pastored and hopefully move into some other kind of ministry if they're still healthy. And I love that you're doing that. So a problem that we've seen, Doug, with Calvary Chapel fellowships and churches stems from the fact, and you and I have talked about this a bunch of times, is that many pastors opted out of Social Security. This was the prevailing counsel back in the early 80s and beyond. And now, as many are getting older and are thinking about the next season of their lives, their financial future looks real murky to them because they opted out. And I think the idea originally was, if you do opt out, then take that money, instead of putting it into Social Security, then invest it. But I've only met one or two other pastors that ever actually did opt out and then invested all those years. And they're set up pretty good, but everybody else didn't. So what advice do you have for pastors in this situation? Because some guys don't want to stop pastoring their church, and for the first time in their lives, they've been doing ministry for the income, and they hate that they're just dependent upon the income from the pastorate, even though they really would like to retire and move on to another area of ministry in their lives.
Yeah, no, you actually hit the nail on the head. After they opted out from Social Security, they didn't take that money and invest it. And you look at that, and that's just a huge lost opportunity. So trying to play catch up is really, really tough. There's, as one church, as we were working with them, they maxed out the pastor's retirement account, right? 50, 60,000 into his account the last year. And now they're going to be doing, similar amounts over the next 5 years. That's one way. Sometimes they get into, in some cases, appointment, right? They're actually helping out other churches and coming alongside and helping in that capacity. But I always say, let me at the board. Let me go stand and work with the board to, because the pastor can't go to the board about this stuff. So if he brings it up and I start talking to him, in some cases I've been able to work with the board to design a plan for the pastor. In some cases, we've actually helped pastors set up their own 501c3 because they have God's given them a vision either for writing or speaking or teaching or things like that they can continue doing ministry. And that's allowed them to collect income, and yet the church has been able to still fund their retirement account for 5 years after they've left the pulpit. So there's different options that can come out of these situations, but it's engaging with us and having those discussions to really, collaborate together. And that's what I like to do, is collaborate with the pastor, with the board, and just see, what's God called him to do and how can we do this in the most cost-effective manner possible, right? And try to give him the best tax advantage. In some cases, they can do, they can get a tax-free housing allowance, and they get a Roth 403B that's built in this plan. So if we do this right, it can be 100% tax-free. You can have a 501c3. We've helped people do that, and they can move on into a different phase of life, a different phase of ministry that God's called them to.
Well, that's tremendous. I mean, what you just said a little bit earlier ago, when you said, let me at the board, I think that's such a key thing, Doug, because you're right. Pastors don't want to bring this up to their board. A lot of them feel shy about it and a little self-serving, but they can now, as a result of this podcast, they can say, hey, listen, I was listening to this podcast with Doug Eagle, with Strength for Today's Pastor, and the idea came that maybe you guys could be involved in a retirement plan for me that we haven't thought about before, and you could have Doug come and talk to you. So can we work that out? Can we set that up? And so they're just going, they're taking it off their own slate. They're not having to come up with this themselves. That's what I'm pointing to here. I think that's good.
Well, yeah, and actually, ethically, they can't even be in that conversation. So even when that's happened, I've actually kicked the pastor out and said, go away, right? You got to go somewhere else. I've got to talk with these guys. And that's happened. And we've been able to do that. And in some cases, the board actually hired me to do not only set up a retirement plan, but they wanted to make sure that there was enough there for him. So they actually hired me to do the financial plan for the pastor, because at this point, he's never had anything. So they're just trying to make sure we don't want to overfund it. We don't want to underfund it. We don't want to make sure he's got plenty. So can you do the financial plan on the pastor and then let us know how do we do this? But that's where I'm seeing a good collaboration between the board, the pastor, and our firm.
I'm seeing this whole comprehensive thing, Doug, that the Lord is using you to help guys with. You're helping them with an overall financial philosophy, the baby steps. You're helping them with taking care of emergency situations through, some sort of vehicle that way. And you're helping them with a long-term plan towards retirement. And even in those cases where they're older and they haven't invested in the Social Security system and they can't get out of that, you're even helping them with ideas in that way. And you've created the 403b-9 plan that allows this all to be taken in housing allowance disbursements, and like you just said, tax-free income, tax-free going into it, tax-free coming out of it, and that's golden. So I hope guys will take advantage of this. I really do. This is good.
Well, and we're trying to stay on top. Right now, there's a bill out there called I think it's Clergy 2020, and Kevin McCarthy, the House Rep, is put out there to allow clergy to opt back into Social Security. So we're hoping that does get passed. I haven't seen it. Somebody mentioned it was passed, but I haven't seen it as a passed bill. If it is, and I'd stand corrected. But as of recently, when I was looking for it, I didn't see that it had passed at this point. But who knows? Maybe it will be soon. And if so, then some guys, at least some of the younger guys that opted out and want to opt back in, will have that ability to do that.
Okay. Well, this is good. This has been a good discussion, and again, a comprehensive way of approaching all of this, and a unique way of doing it as well. So, Doug, how can an interested pastor or appointed representative of the church's board, how can they get in touch with you and get started with a process of input and with something that you could be helpful for them in?
Thanks. Yeah. My phone number is area code 661-257-9800. You can go to my website, www.eagleretirementplans with an S at the end, .com. I have an info section there that you can request information. I've actually had quite a few churches and pastors reach us through that contact on our website. We also have a little page there about 403b-9 church plans. And get in touch with us through that. And we'd be more than happy to set up a conference call or webinar to discuss what options are available.
Let's get that phone number again. It's one more time.
661-257-9800.
Okay. And then the website, Eagle Retirement Plans with an S, eagleretirementplans.com.
Correct.
And on that, information about the 403b and also the pastor's legacy plan is referenced through that website as well, right?
Exactly. And that's pastorslegacyplan.com. So that's the other website, and it is referenced in our on our main website too.
Well, I can say, pastors, that from my own personal experience, Doug is an easy guy to talk to, and he's able to answer any questions. And one of the things that I've appreciated about Doug Eagle and about Eagle Retirement Plans is that they want to help pastors. And even if there's a financial advisor that they choose to use outside of getting information from the site, he hasn't been. That hasn't been an issue. He's just focused on helping pastors. And so if that can happen and you want to take advantage of that, that's great. I hope you do. This is something that is a continued and growing issue for pastors today, and we want to strengthen you, and so does Doug. So thanks, Doug, for joining us. This has been a good discussion. But more than that, thanks for making yourself available to serve pastors and for being obedient to that calling.
Oh, you're welcome, Bill. It's my pleasure. And I'm blessed every time I get to work with these pastors and hear what God's doing in their life. And then I get to walk alongside them and help them with the next phase. So I think it's just a double blessing for me to be able to help these shepherds
Amen.
In that way.
Again, Doug Eagle, Eagle Retirement Plans, phone number 661-257-9800, website eagleretirementplans.com. Lots of information there that you can look at on your own and then take the next step if you so are inclined. So thanks again, Doug. And so remember, pastors, we have 123 podcast episodes now that are available to strengthen and encourage you. So I hope you'll check them out. Shoot us an email if there's anything else we can do to help you. God bless you until next time, and may the Lord richly strengthen you as you continue to serve Him. In Jesus' name.
Strength for Today's Pastor is sponsored by Pointman Ministries. You can find us at pointmanministries.com. That's spelled Poimen ministries.com. If something in today's program prompts a question or comment, or if you have a topic idea for a future episode, just shoot us an email at strongerpastors@gmail.com. That's strongerpastors@gmail.com. May the Lord bless you as you serve Him, His pastors, and His church.